So, J. Ruud, what lovable book are we talking about today?
Well, Stacey Margaret Jones, I'll give you a hint. Tertius Lydgate.
It sounds profane.
But does it mean anything to you?
No.
Well, all right.
Welcome to Between the Covers with J. Ruud and Stacey Margaret Jones. We are two authors married to each other, and we are counting down Jay's carefully cultivated list of the 100 most lovable novels in the English language. And we're not really counting them down. We're building the ranking week to week. So you have to listen each week to see how your book fares in the overall rankings.
That's right. You have to listen each week.
You have to listen.
We have ways of making you listen each week.
It's geeky suspense and drama, and we hope you're here for it. All right, so I need a second hint because I don't know Tertius what?
Lydgate.
Lydgate. Okay. I have read this book. Okay.
Clue number 2, the key to all mythologies.
All right, third hint. Please be kind. Be kind.
Clue number 3, a study of provincial life.
Dr. Lydgate. Middlemarch.
Middlemarch it is.
Oh.
George Eliot's Middlemarch.
Oh, one of my favorites. Well, I'm very happy to discuss this lovely book with you today. George Eliot's Middlemarch. So before we get into some of the kind of usual questions, when did this book come out?
1871.
Okay. And how long is it?
In the Penguin edition, which we read, it is 880 pages long.
So it's a tome.
It's a genuine Victorian novel.
Okay, I thought it was longer than that because I carried around a version, I guess it must have been that Penguin edition, around Prague when I first moved to Prague in 1996, I believe. And it
seemed longer.
No, it seemed bigger because it was a big book to have with you everywhere you went. But I spent a lot of time on public transportation, and I really enjoyed escaping the buses, the Prague buses to 1870s.
Well, it was written in 1871. It's set 40 years earlier.
Okay, that's what I thought because I was like, that sounds later than I thought. Okay, so it's a longer novel, British novel by British novelist George Eliot.
Or Marianne Evans.
But
what Victorian publisher would accept a novel
right.
by someone who didn't have a man's name?
Right. I mean, that would just be foolishness. So tell us, who else likes this book?
Virtually everyone loves this book. It ranked as number 27 in the 2003 Big Read, sponsored by the BBC. It was included in the Guardian's list of the 100 greatest novels. It ranked as number 36 in Penguin Publishing's survey of its readers' favorite books. The Norwegian Book Club survey, in cooperation with the Nobel Institute, included Middlemarch in its list of the 100 greatest works in world literature. In 2007, a group of 125 revered authors chose the 10 greatest books of all time, which included Middlemarch as number 10. And, drum roll please, in a 2015 BBC-sponsored poll of book critics from outside the UK intended to name the greatest British novels of all time, Middlemarch came in as number 1.
Oh, wow.
And if you add to that testimony of individual authors, Virginia Woolf called it one of the few English novels written for grown-up people.
It's definitely... It is.
And acclaimed contemporary novelists Martin Amis and Julian Barnes both have called it the greatest novel written in English.
I feel like I want to reread it now because I read it in 1996, so almost 30 years ago. Obviously, I didn't have a detailed knowledge of it right at my fingertips, but you probably saw my reaction when I knew what it was. I mean,
Yeah.
I was just awash in positive feeling and happy emotion. And I think, like I said, I took it everywhere with me when I was living in Prague because I always had time to read. You know, you can't time your arrivals on public transportation. And
Yeah.
if you're me, you're early instead of late. So I always would get somewhere and have time to read. And I honestly was sad when it was over because I loved being with the people in this novel.
Yeah.
And they were so real to me. And I I have this feeling like, you know, you have sometimes when you go to a movie and you can feel like the director loved all the characters, even if the director didn't agree with all the characters, right? And I felt like Eliot loved everybody, even if, you know, they had different roles to play in the novel.
Yeah.
They were complex enough to be, you know, they could just walk right out of the book into the room.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably the greatest strength of this novel.
Yeah.
It's really very realistic.
Yeah.
And the characters are very realistic.
Well, let's do the down and dirty summary because we've already gotten into why this novel is lovable or why I personally love this novel. So can you do it? Can you rise to the challenge of the harps of glory or the trombone of failure?
Okay. So Middlemarch, subtitled A Study of Provincial Life, is set in a fictitious English town in the Midlands, possibly based on Eliot's own hometown of Coventry, 40 years prior to its publication date. The events in the novel go from 1829 to 1832, which is when the first reform bill was enacted in England, the biggest social reform legislation in Britain ever.
Okay.
And it grew out of two separate unfinished novels that Eliot was working on at the time. One of these was entitled Middlemarch, and it was focused on the story of a young provincial doctor named Tertius Lydgate.
I forgot that his first name was Tertius.
Yeah.
So unfortunate.
The other was a shorter effort telling the story of an intelligent but underappreciated woman named Dorothea Brooke. And when Eliot had the happy idea of combining the two stories, it created a hugely complex novel with a plethora of characters. The resulting novel, which is the one we have today, could be said to contain four separate plots: Dorothea Brooke's life and marriage, Tertius Lydgate's career as a new and reforming doctor in the town and his marriage, the rocky courtship of Fred Vinci and Mary Garth, and the downfall of the wealthy Nicholas Bulstrode. Those last two are less important than the first two, but these four plots seem to have little to do with one another at first. But Eliot's masterful storytelling brilliantly shows how the actions of one character may well affect the life of another character in one of the other plots, which by the end become completely intertwined.
Okay. I'm going to give you Harps of Glory.
All right.
I'm feeling very generous because
I
I love this book so much.
It was a long, down and dirty summary, but it's 880 pages, man. You gotta say a little more than a sentence or two.
I know. Well, we have time to say a little bit more now that we're going to get into why is this novel lovable. Do you think of this as an epic novel? Because I do.
Well, it's epic in length. I mean, it's not epic in the usual definition of the term. Kind of, it all takes place in this one little town. It doesn't have the sort of epic setting. And the characters are not heroic. In fact, the end of the novel...
No spoilers.
No, I'm not going to...
Nobody wants to read 800 pages and have the last 80 spoiled by you.
No, I'm not going to spoil anything. I just want to say that it's set in a provincial town.
Right.
But the importance is that by the end of the novel, you have the feeling that people in this little town living their little lives still are doing things that are important. In fact, I'm going to read you the last paragraph of the novel.
Oh my gosh. Controversial.
But I mean, it doesn't give you any spoilers. Basically, the last paragraph in the novel is a sort of summary of the life of Dorothea, who's the main.
Did her romantic interest was Casaubon.
Yeah.
Casaubon.
Or Casaubon.
Okay, because I kept waiting for you to mention him as a character because that name is so unusual, and I always think of it when I think of the book.
Well, let's talk about him. I just wanted to
Yes, please read.
summarize what is important about the country life, which is one of the meanings of provincial.
Sure.
Her full nature, like that river of which Cyrus broke the strength, spent itself in channels which had no great name on the earth, but the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive, for the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. So it's very consciously without an epic hero.
Well, I'm going to say then that to me, it is epic, but it's not the big heroic journeys. It's the daily choices, right? It's more interior, right? It's a smaller playing field, so to speak, but the actions are as meaningful, right?
Within the small playing field, I guess
that's
you could
where
say.
they live,
Yeah.
right? And that's where most people people don't take epic journeys. They live their lives in the same, within small communities of people, right?
Yeah.
And their quality of their life is based on how they treat and are treated within their small communities.
Yeah.
You can live in a city, but you still have a community of friends and colleagues. And, I think that's one reason the book is so meaningful to anybody, because anybody can relate to, your social group and your feeling within that group.
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of epic.
Well, if you say so. I think epic, epic.
I know it has a definition, and I appreciate that. I'm saying that I think it had a kind of epic novel impact on me.
Okay.
More than maybe some of those, because I find it more relatable.
It's yes, it's very relatable. You get to know these people as if they're your own friends or enemies in some cases.
Yeah.
Casaubon, you mentioned.
Yes.
He is Dorothea's husband. He's older than her. He's old enough to be her father.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's just sick and wrong.
I know, it's terrible. He's learned.
Yes.
Scholar.
I remember that.
He's a clergyman, but he's working on this kind of lifetime epic piece of scholarship called
What?
The Key to All Mythologies. That's what
It's a
he's
big
planning.
swing.
It's a big topic. And she's impressed. She wants to help him in this great work of his.
Right.
Everybody, her family, and particularly her sister, thinks that this is a crazy choice for her to accept this guy instead of their neighbor who's a landowner, who's their own class, who's their own age, who ends up marrying her sister because Dorothea wants to marry Casaubon. And
she wants that kind of engagement and intellectual engagement and stimulation.
He's the only person who talks to her like she has a brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the most appealing thing about him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what attracts her to him the most. So she does marry him. They go off to Italy on their honeymoon, and she's completely disappointed because he doesn't really let her help him at all in his work. Doesn't really talk much about it to her. And
bait and switch.
Pretty much. Yeah. So her marriage is very unsuccessful for her.
Unfulfilling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, Dr. Lydgate, he's a young doctor. He's come to town. He's working with this rich guy, Bulstrode, who nobody in town really likes. He's someone who came from the outside, you know. He wasn't born in the town. And people are suspicious of him. He's kind of a religious extremist, you could say, rather than, you know, straight normal Anglican. And people say, oh, I wouldn't trust him. But he's the guy who wants to start this hospital, and Lydgate is the guy that he wants to run it, basically, and help him with it. So, and Lydgate is trying to establish himself in the town. He's trying to start something that's going to be really important, and he doesn't want to get married until he's established himself. But alas,
he also makes an unfortunate choice, if I recall.
he makes a very unfortunate choice.
Okay.
There's the daughter of the mayor of the town. Rosamond Vincy.
Rose of the World?
Rose of the World. Because she sort of sets her cap for him, and she wants to marry this guy.
He's a handsome young doctor, new in the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, her parents aren't crazy about the marriage because he doesn't have money. But she's, you know, like 19 or something, and
She's pretty old.
entices him, and he falls for her and gets married and realizes that he's made a terrible choice. She's one of the... You said you liked all the characters, and that
No, I didn't say I liked all the characters. Well, maybe I did, but I said that you could tell that the author has some kind of love for all of them.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not correct, but that was my memory of it, that they were each so carefully wrought
yeah.
that there was some kind of positive regard for them by Eliot, even if you as the reader didn't like them all.
Yeah. I'm not sure she loves
Rosamond.
that much. I mean, Rosamond is really just a spoiled brat.
Yeah.
And everything that's ever gone wrong has been somebody else's problem.
Oh, we know the type.
And she's never guilty of anything. And, you know,
Yeah.
Tertius tries to reason with her and tries to get her to... You know, he gets deeply in debt. And he tries to get her to make some sacrifices. You know, okay, we don't have to have 2 horses. We don't have to have
Right.
you know, several servants. You know,
But it's all she cares about is
Oh,
the
yeah.
appearance of...
and it's his fault if they
Right.
can't afford this.
Right.
Yeah, she's not a very likable character.
She reminds me of...
Neither is Casaubon, for that
No,
matter.
he doesn't deserve Dorothea. Rosamond reminds me of Emma Bovary.
Yeah.
Like there's some similarities there with their self-interest.
Yeah.
Their inability to be on the same team as their spouse, right? Their adversary. She's an adversary.
Yeah.
You know, she wanted him, he married her, and now she's just disappointed all the time.
Yeah.
Instead of, I'm on Team Lydgate, right?
Yeah.
Today, Team Lydgate's going to do this and this and this, right?
Yeah, she's on Team
Rosamond.
and she's the only one who counts.
And she's the only one on the team.
Well, no, her parents are on
and
the team.
he probably is on her team. I mean,
He'd like to be.
He's principled in that, he married her and he wants her to be happy, but it's impossible.
It's pretty difficult.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, there are foils for the main characters, obviously.
Yeah.
That's part of the drama of a novel is the barriers to success, right? Barriers to the yearning, right? We have these characters with these things they want.
Yeah.
And then they have obstacles.
Yeah. A real foil to Rosamond is Mary Garth. She's the one that Fred Vincy marries. Fred is Rosamond's brother. Mm-hmm. They're the children of the town's mayor.
Right.
Mary is a basically selfless person who's always, I mean, she's almost saint-like. It's hard to find any fault with her. She's taking care of Fred Vincey's uncle, who is this really rich guy who's really old, and he's dying. People are thinking that Fred is going to be his heir, and Fred is thinking that too. And neither of the Vincey's children think very well of anybody else. Fred, though, does think of Mary as somebody he would like to please, even though he drops out of college mainly because he doesn't want to be a priest, which is pretty much what people were going to college for. But he doesn't know what he wants to do.
Right.
And
he just wants money.
He just wants to, he does a lot of gambling. That's part of why he loses money.
Yeah, I forgot that.
But because of Mary, who won't have anything to do with him unless he goes and finishes his education, he goes back to school. But then when he's done with that, he still doesn't know what to do because he doesn't want to be a priest. And she will not even think of him proposing to her or anything unless he's set himself up in something that's going to be a lifetime position for him.
Right.
So Fred and his sister have a lot in common, except that Fred does think about at least one other person.
Right, because he wants to be with her.
Yeah.
And so he allows that influence on him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he also likes her father, who actually loans him money, and then he can't pay the father back.
Bless.
So there's that. But Mary's probably the biggest foil to Rosamond.
Why do you think Eliot wrote about this time period at the time that she did? I mean, it reminds me a little bit of Wharton, who's writing in the teens and 20s about 1870s New York, right?
Yeah.
Like with this perspective of time, right?
Yeah.
Well,
it's a really significant period.
Yeah. The time that she wrote about?
The time that she's writing about, because the Industrial Revolution is causing big changes in small towns in provincial England. Also, the Reform Bill. The Reform Bill of 1832 really enfranchises way more people than had been able to vote before. Okay. And, the Commons were going to be more important than the Lords in
the House
Parliament.
of Commons. Yeah.
So there's a lot of this kind of stuff that's going on in the background.
So it's a fulcrum, like things are tipping.
Yeah.
Okay, so that might be her perspective in the, I suppose, 1860s when she's putting this novel together and writing it.
Yeah.
That, this period, when she looks back, she can see things are different.
This was a big turning point in history. What would things be like in a small town at that time? When these things are going on.
Like somebody now might write a novel set before the information age or at the time of the onset, right? Because you can look back and see how different our lives are from rotary dial phones and...
Yeah, those were the days.
That's what I mean, though. Right? Like, things changed for the better, but... maybe some things were also lost, or, some things were lost. Were all those things that were lost, should they have gone? What are we still attached to? What do we long for? What do we miss? How do we see ourselves differently than how we saw ourselves then?
Yeah.
Which I think this novel does give you a vision of how British, small town English people would have seen themselves at that time.
Yeah. Switching gears a minute.
Yeah.
Casaubon, we talked about the difficulties with Lydgate's marriage and his spouse. Casaubon is extremely jealous of this young cousin of his, Ladislaw, who spends a lot of time with Dorothea when they meet him in Italy.
He's jealous because he's a little inside.
Yeah.
They meet Ladislaw in Italy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he spends some time with Dorothea. He also reveals to Dorothea what he knows. I mean, he's a little bit like Fred, actually. He's kind of,
Fred Vincy.
Fred Vincy. He's kind of like lost. He doesn't have an occupation, really. He's interested in the arts and in writing. He does ultimately get a position in Middlemarch, where he's on the newspaper, and he does some writing there. But he actually adores Dorothea, and he doesn't have any designs on her or think that she's going to, marry him eventually.
He's not pursuing her. He just adores her.
But Casaubon sees this as a threat, kind of.
Sure.
And he writes a will in which he leaves all his property to Dorothea, but there's a codicil to the will that says if she ever marries Ladislaw, she forfeits all of what she's inheriting from him.
Pretty petty. Like,
Yeah.
It's not like she's going to leave him, take his property, and marry Ladislaw. He'll be dead.
Yeah. And he's suspicious also and angry, I think, because Dorothea keeps telling him about... See, Ladislaw's mother was Casaubon's aunt, I think, is how it works. But she married somebody that the family didn't approve of.
Right.
And she went off, and she was disinherited. And Dorothea thinks that this was unjust. And she tries to get Casaubon to help Ladislaw out some. He has done a little something for him when he was younger, but he's not willing to do much more. And Dorothea thinks that she's inherited all of this when it rightly should have gone to Ladislaw and his family. But she can't do anything about it.
So she takes a stand different from the family she's married into.
Oh, yeah, and particularly from her husband.
Yeah.
So that's a little wrinkle.
As well. I mean, there's so much. That's why I love this book, I think, is because this is what happens. Like, there's, you look at a family from outside and you have a perspective on them, or you think you know what they're like, and then you become friends with someone in the family, like in Brideshead Revisited, or you marry into the family like Middlemarch, and suddenly the drama, is ever present. It sweeps you up, right? You're caught up in it, and then it takes you places you don't think your life is going to go.
Yeah.
And even though it's provincial, right, in terms of little, right, it's big to you.
But that is another sense of provincial. I think when she says it's a novel of provincial life, there's two things she has in mind.
Right.
One is what we said about Dorothea making this big difference in the small scale.
Yeah.
But the other thing is a more common definition of provincial, not sophisticated,
Right.
outside of the big world, and a place where lots of petty people have a lot of gossip. And there are chapters in Middlemarch that are kind of interspersed where you have these minor characters talking about stuff and gossiping about Dorothea married this guy and he's going to do that, and she must have had an affair with Ladislaw because and all of this kind of gossip that goes on behind the scenes in a provincial town.
Yeah, as if they're kind of rubes, but then it also...
Well, I mean, people gossip everywhere.
Right, because this makes me think of this idea of gossip, which is, we look down on gossip and we talk about women gossiping, right? Women gossip and it's destructive and they don't have anything else to talk about. But gossip is an important social tool to maintaining order. Because when you talk about people in a negative way, it exerts pressure, right? I'm not saying gossip is a force for good. necessarily.
It's a force for pressure.
It's a force, right? And people use it to maintain social order according to their values. So if you are in a church and somebody is gossiping about how somebody did something, it exerts pressure on that person to do it in the way that the culture or the society, however big or small, decides it should be done. So I think it's really interesting that she has these passages about this gossip, right? Because gossiping about Dorothea and Ladislaw is also pressure for Dorothea not to be friends with him, not to take his part against her husband's family, right? It's pressure.
Yeah.
And I think that everybody gossips, like you said, and it can be a way, culturally to maintain the values of the culture.
Yeah. And it's the people in the novel who are the most unlike the rest of the town who get gossiped about the most. I mean, Dorothea does something that's just not right in most people's opinions. Right. She married this old guy instead of somebody with money who's her own age. Lydgate is talked about mainly because he's a doctor with new ideas,
right?
Who realizes that the physicians of the past have, to a large extent, been pretty damn stupid.
Yeah.
and their cures often killed people.
Right.
And
he's trying to be scientific.
Yeah.
And, right. Learned.
And the other doctors are like, well, this isn't the way we do things. So he's not one of the popular people. And Bulstrode, the rich guy who came from outside, he's gossiped about a lot. It turns out with good reason.
Right.
You find that out sort of later in the book.
But these are all ways of getting them to stay in their lane,
yeah.
right? Get in your lane and stay in your lane in our town.
Yeah.
We decide what's important here, and you're violating the ways that we do things.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I mean, I think that's a very accurate view of, obviously she has experience with it. But what's that Richard Russo line about academia, that the fighting is so bitter because the stakes are so small?
Yeah, and that's probably true of a lot of small towns.
Yeah, it's small to an outsider, but it's not small to you when you live there, and that's your whole life.
Yeah.
And when you wake up in the morning, you want to know what to expect of your friends and neighbors and family, and if they're not doing what's expected of them, you are going to exert pressure, right? So that you feel secure. My world isn't changing, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to get you back. And this was a time where their
the
world
world
was
changing.
changing.
That's very much.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yep.
Wow. Anything else lovable about this novel?
Well, the language. I mean,
I often say when I'm reading a book that, or even a short story or something, that if the story or if the writing is good, I can't see the page because I am so attentive to what is in my head, what I'm imagining, right?
Mm.
And I just, like I said, I was sad when this book was over because I never really saw the page. I was just in that world, right?
Yeah.
I still have a vision of Casaubon's library. Do you have a library?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can still see how I imagined her in that library because it was so real to me.
A big library because he's doing all this research.
Yeah.
Just a couple of examples of her prose.
Yes.
Toward the end of the book, Eliot comments about Dorothea and says she had the makings of a heroic woman like Antigone or Saint Teresa, but she lived amidst the conditions of an imperfect social state in which great feelings will often take the aspect of error and great faith the aspect of illusion. And that's what people gossip about.
I was going to say, that goes back to our discussion of gossip in a small town.
Yeah.
Her writing is amazing.
And some of it, she's inside the characters' heads a lot, and you get the sort of psychological makeup of their minds,
Yes.
what they're thinking about. Early in Dorothea's marriage to Cassivan, she says, she was as blind to his inward troubles as he to hers. She had not yet learned those hidden conflicts in her husband which claim our pity. She had not yet listened patiently to his heartbeats, but only felt that her own was beating violently.
Oh, wow. That's so beautifully put.
Yeah, and it's not unlike Rosamund.
Right.
So Dorothea grows out of it.
Right. Well, and you can kind of see you can empathize with her self-interest because she's trying to help him and he won't let her.
Yeah.
Whereas you're not sympathetic with Rosamund.
No.
Because her self-interest is appalling. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really interesting because they're kind of playing the same role in a way, and yet one is sympathetic and the other is unsympathetic.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting...
Because one is a dynamic character and the other is a static character.
Right.
That does not change.
That makes me think of Mad Men, which I often think of, because there's a lot that's been said or written about Betty Draper as a static character, which is why, she's written that way on purpose, right? It's not a failure of the writing. There are no failures of writing on Mad Men. Anyway, that is her tragedy as a character, is that she cannot change. And she too is living through a time in which there is immense change, especially for women, right?
Yeah.
And she cannot change. And that's interesting because Dorothea does grow and Rosamund is uninterested.
Yeah.
Why might someone not like this novel? I mean, I don't know if I want to know them.
Well,
like this novel, but
it's
probably not for everybody.
The novel was not that popular when it was first published.
Mm-hmm. It's long. Was it published in? Was it?
Well, it was published in
serialized, or
yeah, I think it was serialized first and then published as most of these are.
Yeah.
George Eliot had already written Mill on the Floss and Silas Marner and Adam Bede. So she was
well known,
fairly well known author at the time. I mean, she wasn't, although from a contemporary point of view, it looks kind of silly that she wasn't considered as important a novelist as Thackeray or Trollope, and definitely not Dickens.
Right.
But
the big brand name Dickens.
yeah, and this book, I think, I'm not completely sure why it wasn't as popular as some of those others, but it wasn't.
Maybe it's because it's about provincial life. Maybe people aren't as interested in that.
Maybe, although so are those other books.
Well, yeah, but Trollope is about, aristocracy, class.
Yeah,
I mean, people can relate to that because everyone is in a class. They know what class they're in. They know what class they want to be in.
And, when you talk about Dickens, it's his kind of colorful Dickensian characters.
They're kind of archetypal.
Yeah, but they're not as meticulously realistic psychologically as Eliot's are.
Same with Trollope. I mean, I love Trollope. And his novels are incredibly engrossing. Also, you're in the world, right? But I don't feel that they're as fully realized. Let's put it that way.
So I'm not sure why people didn't really like it as much.
Why might somebody not like it now?
Well, it's 880 pages long.
But it's so good, you'll be sad. You'll wish it was 1,600.
There's, it's not a lot of action.
That's true.
It's not really plot-driven so much as it is character-driven. So it's possible you might not like it. But the most, I guess you could say, the turning point for Eliot's reputation comes in 1949 or 48, because by then she was largely, relegated to the back of the bus.
Yeah. This quaint novelist we used to read.
Yeah, and the critic, incredibly influential critic named F.R. Leavis, wrote an incredibly influential book called The Great Tradition.
Mm-hmm. Is he British?
Oh, yeah. But in The Great Tradition, he focuses he begins to focus on Middlemarch as the great novel. And he talks about, here are the great novelists in English. Eliot, Austen.
Yeah. She wrote after Austen, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Joseph Conrad. D.H. Lawrence, I think.
Oh, okay.
So, there's only 5 great novelists in English literature, and
she's
these are the
one of
ones. And Middlemarch is the novel. So that really created a kind of renaissance for George Eliot
Sure.
that hasn't
Ceased.
abated at all. In fact, it's gotten more and more important. But the most sensitive readers at the time that the novel came out really appreciated it. Emily Dickinson read the novel's first edition.
Oh.
And she wrote to her cousins in April of 1873. Apparently they had written and said, "How did you like Middlemarch?" And what she wrote was, "What do I think of Middlemarch? What do I think of glory? Except that in a few instances this mortal has already put on immortality. George Eliot was one. The mysteries of human nature surpass the mysteries of redemption. For the infinite we only suppose, while we see the finite." So let that be the last word on the novel.
Well, I have one question in terms of contemporaries. When did the Brontes, were they contemporaries of Eliot?
They would have been older contemporaries,
Okay. That's
because
what I
they were
thought.
writing around 1850.
Right. Okay. I was just curious about who
And
else
her
was
first
working at
novel
the
was,
time.
I think, 1859.
So, how do you rank Middlemarch on your list? How many books have we ranked so far?
We have ranked, I believe, 26 books. I'm going to put Middlemarch right after Catcher in the Rye, right before The Amazing Adventures of Calder and Clay, which would make it number 8.
So, Middlemarch is
list.
number 8.
Yes.
Catcher in the Rye is number 7.
Yeah.
Middlemarch is number 8. And The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay is number 9.
Yep.
All right, so top 10 so far.
It's a top 10er.
It should be. It's a wonderful novel. I think I've forgotten enough about it, I could read it again for the first time. Maybe I should.
I don't see why not.
It really
Other
is
than
glorious.
The fact that you have 100 other books to read. This one may take you a while.
I know. I love it, though. Awesome.
But
Well,
is it time now, do you think, for Chaos Reader?
Yes. So we recently read a book I suspect you'll be talking about sometime. You better be talking about it on some episode, The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, which I think has to be one of my favorite novels of all time. I think that was my 3rd or 4th reading of it. And honestly, the movie is...
So where would you place it compared to Middlemarch?
I don't know. I guess ahead of Middlemarch maybe, but I don't know. They're close. They're about the same thing and different things. They're about relationships within a community and how those relationships influence each other and what people want internally and what they try to get and what they won't admit to. And I just love The Age of Innocence, which is about 1870s old New York with the very, very, very rich people of New York society and the hierarchy within that society. I mean, if you were on the outside of this, which odds are you would have been, looking in, you probably wouldn't see that the van der Luydens were the very top. And then these people were the next tier. And these people were in that tier, but very precariously balanced because of this, that, or the other thing. I mean, the subtlety of it is astounding, and Wharton is just such a wonderful renderer of this world because she was born into it and was married to someone else also in it, and then she got a divorce, which was very unusual. She did not have any children, and she got a divorce. And she was a very successful writer and made money writing. And she wrote about this world of old New York. I think The Nation said in a review of her novel that she wrote about the vanished age of old New York as familiarly as if she loved them and as lucidly as if she hated them. And I think that is the best description of this book. It is wonderful. You have so much empathy and investment in the characters. And I think there's an opacity about the characters beyond Newland Archer. It's really from his point of view. It's not a first-person novel, but the narrator really only sees what Newland sees, right? And so things are revealed to the reader in a way that they are revealed to Newland Archer, who's the main character. And he's struggling with his desires to be, rebellious against the constraints of his society and community and culture, and yet wanting all the benefits of being in his society and community and culture. And well, it's just a beautiful book. I love it. And I hope I'll read it again someday. So,
and who knows? Maybe we'll talk about it someday.
Again. Better.
Well, that's it for this week.
That's it for this week. So we would like to invite you to review, like, share, follow, comment, etc., and tell one of your friends about Between the Covers. Send them a link to one of the episodes you think they would like, and that's how our podcast will grow. And we are a small independent podcast. We would like to thank our producer, Jerry Bruno, for teaching us how to do this on our own any day now. We'll get through an episode. But thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Between the covers.